So I don't have a problem with clones per se. In fact, I own a few clones. As you've seen on this channel, I love vintage synths, but I also think the clones are bringing a wider audience and a greater appreciation for these beautiful vintage instruments in unique and different ways. But I want to talk about a couple of problems with the whole clone thing. Let's talk about it. Hi, I'm Zach Marr from Alamo Music here in San Antonio, Texas. You can find us online at alamomusic.com. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button, turn on your notifications. This is our Alamo Sound Lab channel where we talk about all things music technology related. And today we're going to talk about the ugly truth of cloning. And I wanted to get into some of the kind of theoretical or philosophical issues around cloning and perhaps explain why so many people get so heated when Behringer releases a clone, or when Roland does a boutique, or some other manufacturer, Korg, reissues an art product. There are so many opinions when these moments happen, and I wanted to talk about a few of the issues I think that these manufacturers are faced with when they're making clones that I don't think get enough appreciation, and then ultimately offer perhaps a better or more productive lens to talk about clones or reissues or reinventions. So first, I want to talk about the problem of when you're designing a clone or a VST or a reissue, whether it be a boutique, a digital reimagining with highly accurate modeling or even somewhat highly accurate modeling, or Behringer with their claims that they are re-engineering the analog kind of circuitry from these original vintage machines and offering affordable versions for the masses, or Korg, which is also re-engineering kind of classic analogs, but they're a little bit more expensive than the Behringers. Anyway, one of the issues that I think is very fascinating is a lot of these instruments, and here are two that were released recently, and both of them have this problem. A lot of these instruments had multiple revisions, and not all the revisions are incredibly well documented. You can find information about it in forums in various places, but these different revisions use different circuitry and different components, and they have slightly different tones. And so one of the questions that I'm always curious about is, when you're doing this, what are you designing? Which clone or which revision are you designing this after? In some cases, the manufacturer has multiple revisions in the same unit. I think the Prophet 5 or Rev 4 has a switch that allows you to do different filters. Some of the Behringers have had, I think the Odyssey has an ability to do different revisions. Is it the Odyssey or is it the 2600? I don't know. One of them has different revision switch. But I think it's an interesting problem that, and even in VSTs, that isn't always talked about and not always appreciated. And I think it's a problem also because whatever vintage instrument you own or have experienced, if you're lucky, that colors your perception of the way it should sound. And a lot of these conversations online, I've noticed people talking authoritatively about the way it sounds and how unrealistic it may be. But what if you are basing it on a revision that it wasn't intended for? And I think that is kind of a problem that isn't as well understood, and manufacturers aren't as forward about the design decisions they're making. So I think that is an interesting problem for this renaissance of synthesizers that we're living in, which I think is fantastic and I'm very appreciative of, but I think it would make the discussions about how authentic or how inspired an instrument is maybe more productive to take that into account. Second, in the case where you're making an analog reproduction, I think there's a very interesting problem in regards to manufacturing. So manufacturing has advanced quite a bit from the era in which these classic instruments were created. So most circuit boards today are surface mount soldered, and also they are incredibly small. They're microscopic and compared to the size of the circuit boards which were through mount soldered in the past, and much larger. So manufacturing has come a long way. And so when you get these recreations, and probably the most illustrative of this is if you look at a Prophet, the insides of a Prophet Rev 4 versus a Prophet Rev 3, there's a ton of empty space in the Rev 4 if you open it up. And the circuit boards are way smaller. Hopefully I can get a picture to show, insert it right here if we can find one. But there is so much space in the Rev 4 compared to the Rev 3, 2, or 1. And the soldering is different. And so the question is, are there implications to the sound that are not, from an engineering standpoint, can you overcome them when you are functioning on these vastly different scales and the soldering is different? How does that contribute to the sound? Are those things that can be reconciled from an engineering standpoint? I think it is very difficult for you to say that it doesn't color it in some way. And I'm not an engineer, but I think when people compare these A and B, often there's kind of a sense, they get so close, but there's small things that are different, and it's just a tone or a feel. And it often is even lost in recordings. People say, well, we won't be able to tell in the mix, or we won't be able to, and that's true, actually. I think that's true. But I also don't want to minimize the fact that they are different. They are, in a sense, not ever going to be the same thing. And even from a repair standpoint, if you talk to techs, it's much easier to work on the older units because it's a lot larger, it's not as microscopic, and it might be easier to maintain even, arguably. So I think those are two really interesting problems with clones, and I just wanted to have this conversation because I think it's one that deserves more attention. And finally, I want to conclude with perhaps a better framework for looking at each of these and evaluating them. I think music, and I appreciate people's comments when they say, well, at the end of the day, what are you going to do with it? It's not a $6,000 vintage or a $10,000 vintage synth or a $300 clone that makes wonderful music. It's a human being with an instrument. And I think each of these is simply a paintbrush or a tool for you to use in your music creation and for me to use in my music creation. And does it inspire you? Does it not inspire you? Is it in your budget? Is it not in your budget? You know, I think those are more helpful lenses to use instead of this is good, this is bad, this is not accurate. Those conversations are less productive. They're fun. I enjoy having them, but people get so heated about it. And I think ultimately when people say, well, what are you going to do with it? What kind of music are you going to make with it? I think that is absolutely right. And I think it's wonderful that there are so many reimaginations going on right now and even recreations and additions, you know, things like the RD9 or the JX08. They're not just trying to be the past, they're taking the past and reinventing it in an affordable price point for the future. So just wanted to throw that out there. I hope this conversation was helpful. We'd love to continue it below. Leave a comment. We'd love to talk further. And until next time, I hope you make lots of music.